Back in the day, before streaming, before CDs, we listened to music on albums. A vinyl disc spinning 33 and a third revolutions per minute brought us great music one side at a time. 20 or so minutes of music, 4 or 5 songs usually, that created a single listening experience. This format exposed us to other songs of the artist, not just the hits, and often flowed in an order that was created to build and maintain or mold a musical experience for the listener.
Sideshow brings musical experiences from the past to life today. Here, we discuss and review individual sides of record albums we have grown to appreciate and hope you will too. Welcome to The Sideshow.
Welcome to The Sideshow, and today Mike is going to lead us off. Why don't you let everybody know, Mike, what we are going to be talking about today?
Well, today I have selected one of my all-time favorites, both the band and the album, and it is Traffic, John Barleycorn Must Die, side 1. And I did not start listening to Traffic until I was in college. Some people that I lived with my second year of attending college, when I lived in a 3-story or half of a 3-story house with a group of guys, and one of the guys that I lived with had a lot of jazz and bands that I wasn't necessarily familiar with, and one of the albums that got regular airplay at that house was John Barleycorn Must Die. Traffic was really a very substantial band in terms of the quality of its music and the talent of the band members in the late 60s and early 70s. Didn't really put out a large volume of music. There's just a handful of albums, and they had a few albums before they eventually disbanded, or at least the original band primarily disbanded. And John Barleycorn was kind of the peak, in my opinion, of their quality. Not necessarily their best album overall, but their first album was from 1967, and the members of the band included someone that most people have heard of. Steve Winwood was sort of the primary musician in the band. He had previously, like as a teenager, been in a band called the Spencer Davis Group, and they had a song that made it on the radio called "I'm a Man," which was eventually covered by Chicago, the band Chicago, on I believe was their first album, and was a radio song for the band Chicago. And the other members of the band were the songwriter that many people may have also heard of, named Dave Mason. And the drummer was Jim Capaldi, and then the fourth member of the band was named Chris Wood, and he was a woodwinds player, saxophone, flute, things of that nature. And their first album was in 1967. It was called Mr. Fantasy, and for the most part, the song "Dear Mr. Fantasy" is the song that's remembered from that album. It came out in 1967, around the time of the Summer of Love and Sgt. Pepper and the Monterey Pop Festival and all that stuff. And it was an album of psychedelic songs, but not necessarily like the Beatles, Lucy in the Sky type, nor the kind of like the San Francisco Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead type either. Their music was, eventually kind of grew into sort of a stew of R&B, just pop rock, jazz, and was very unique. And they, took some of their cues from bands like Fairport Convention and stuff like that, and came up with a very, I think, unique sound as a band. And there were a number of other songs off of their first album that got on the radio at the time. but for the most part, I mean, the only song that comes to mind, because I don't actually own a compact disc of Mr. Fantasy. The only song that really comes to mind at this point is Dear Mr. Fantasy. Their second album, which was just an eponymously titled album, Traffic, came out in 1968, and that is probably their best album. And it was really the last album where Dave Mason was a full-time member. And there's a lot of great songs on that album. So I mean, some of their best songs: "Who Knows What Tomorrow May Bring," "Feeling All Right," which became very popular. Joe Cocker did a cover of that song that was very popular. A lot of people are familiar with that song. 40,000 Headmen. Just good, I mean, good, solid, unique songs that last. I mean, that have kind of staying power. Traffic's third album, which is called Last Exit, came out in 1969. And that was really just sort of an odds and sods collection of material that had been previously recorded. So it wasn't music that wasn't originally recorded for the purposes of this new album. It was stuff that they had available, and it was used to put an album together. Studio material on the first side, and then the second side was actually two longer tracks that were recorded live in the United States at the Fillmore Auditorium. Traffic were from England, but that's not necessary. It has that feel that it's kind of thrown together. There were some Dave Mason songs on it. The two standouts, in my opinion, are two songs: "Medicated Goo," which is a song that Steve Winwood has continued to play. There's also been some reunion type shows that have happened here and there since the Traffic were in their heyday. But those two songs, I think, are good songs that stand up with the best of Traffic. But the rest of the album was relatively forgettable. I do have that. It wasn't on compact disc. It wasn't that long ago that I listened to that. But in any case, at that point, the band, Dave Mason had left the band, and Steve Winwood was going to record a solo album. And he started working in the studio and putting down some material and getting some things together. And then he kind of realized he needed some musicians that he had a little better feel of, and that he could mesh with a little better than whoever it was that he was dealing with, or just by himself. There, he was playing some of the songs he was playing multiple instruments, kind of not unlike Paul McCartney when he did his first solo album, playing all the instruments himself, kind of thing. But he ended up using Jim Capaldi and Chris Wood, the drummer and the woodwind player from Traffic, to come in and help him with his solo album. And they were just having a good time jamming, and it became the next Traffic album without the participation of Dave Mason, who had previously been in the band. And so that's kind of the story of Traffic leading up to John Barleycorn. We lived together in Madison for 3 years. Mark, you undoubtedly heard this album played. I mean, what's your take on things?
Well, first of all, I mean, the Traffic, Steve Winwood, he was as you said, really a musical prodigy. Starting out at a very early age, seen as a talent in the music industry, very talented individual and strong person. Kind of, along the way before we get to this album, he did take a little detour and linked up with Eric Clapton for a little while in a supergroup, Blind Faith. So well regarded across the industry, is really a powerful person. When it comes to Traffic, I mean, I do think of this album because you did play it a lot. There was probably two songs though that really originally stuck in my head that around when I thought of Traffic. The first was actually recorded after this album that we're going to talk about, which was the song "Low Spark of High Heeled Boys," which is just an entertaining song, and it really highlights both the musical vocals of Steve Winwood, and then his keyboard playing as well. That's really highlighted there. And the other song that I think about, you've talked a little bit about it, but I absolutely feel is the coolest song of all time. And, I can kind of picture, you talked about when you got exposed to this. I picture, say, if we can go back to when we were in high school, and let's say we had found a way with our group of friends to get invited to like a real college house party. And I mean, this is potentially going to be the coolest night of our life. And we're making our way there. We can see on our way up that maybe there's some very hot older college women that are making their way into this house party that we've been invited to. We make our way in. People are welcoming. The kegs in the back. You can smell a little marijuana in the air. Even the chicks are smiling at us. I mean, this is going to be the coolest experience of our life. And the song that would be playing at that party would be "Dear Mr. Fantasy." Without any doubt in my mind, that fits perfectly in with that notion when you are in an environment that is just cool above your level. I think of that song, Dear Mr. Fantasy. So I've always seen, Traffic as just a band that produced this cool music. It's very different. You're not hearing a lot of guitar and guitar solos on Traffic. In fact, they tend to highlight the keyboard, but it's done in a way that absolutely feels, as a rock and roll, type song, but with a very distinct thing. And Steve Winwood's voice also a very distinct vocal that you hear, and produced some really good music. And it was probably some of the first full album sides that I ever listened to was this album, and that was what you would put on fairly regularly at when we were rooming together in Madison. So a great album, and from a great band.
When some of the things that you mentioned, Dear Mr. Fantasy, a very different feel that someone figured out regarding that song was in the made-for-TV movie adaptation of Go Ask Alice, which, when like around the time we were in, late elementary school, early junior high, that came out. Yep. And towards the end of the movie, where Alice is trying to stay clean and not use drugs, and some of her fake friends dose her with LSD, and when she can feel what's happening, and she knows what it is, the music that plays during on the soundtrack is Dear Mr. Fantasy.
Yes.
So it's sort of like as the feeling of the drugs comes back and she knows what it is, that's the sound accompaniment that was chosen for that experience, a negative experience that Alice was having. But you mentioned Blind Faith, that Steve Winwood was in with Eric Clapton and also Rick Gretsch and Ginger Baker, who had been one of Eric Clapton's bandmates in Cream. One of the more known songs that group came up with was "I Can't Find My Way Home."
Yes,
which was a Steve Winwood song. It's just a great song. I mean, a great classic rock song. And going back to high school, the Steve Winwood's solo album, which is late 70s. I don't recall the exact date, but Arc of a Diver.
Yes.
And that had some great songs on it. If You See a Chance, the song Arc of a Diver, the song Spanish Dancer. I mean, that was a fabulous. And so I was familiar with Steve Winwood as a performer primarily. I mean, that was my first exposure to Steve Winwood, was that Arc of a Diver album. And it wasn't until I got into college that I'd heard Dear Mr. Fantasy. Yeah. But it wasn't until I got into college that I really was exposed to Traffic and kind of stuck my nose into that, and they're a great band. And you mentioned Low Spark of High Heeled Boys. That was kind of the last real solid record that they put out. And the original Traffic band did put out a few, 2 or 3 more albums after that, but Low Spark of Highland Boys was their last that was sort of their swan song of material that was ever going to make it on the radio type thing. But John Barleycorn Must Die it's it's unique in terms of traffic, in my opinion, because the opening track on side one, which is the side that we're talking about today, is an instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think off the top of my head, and like I say, I haven't listened to Mr. Fantasy in a long time, but I can't think of another instrumental track by Traffic. But Glad is the name of the first track, and it starts out with a piano figure, and then some organ thrown on there, and the drums are there. And then it just kind of starts out as really a relatively straightforward saxophone jam.
Mm-hmm.
And jam isn't really the right word. It's more of a song than a jam. But it's the sax playing this repeated figure. Then the piano comes back in, and it really has that stew that I kind of referred to earlier, but more of a jazz emphasis. There's still kind of an
Mm-hmm.
R&B feel to it. One of Jim Capaldi's qualities as a drummer is he could play intricate rhythms with subtlety, but that kind of took control of the groove of the song.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the opening track is a good example of that, and then all three tracks on side one are a good example of that. And so it kind of goes back and forth between this sax bit and the piano, and then the sax, and then about 2/3 of the way through the song, it kind of transitions into this slower, very haunting piano.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. It's very unique. And when I was new to this record, and it would get to that point of the song, it was always very striking to me, and I thought it was very beautiful, very artistic, very haunting, but accessible. It wasn't weird. It wasn't. They weren't trying too hard to be anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole track has a feeling to me like these are three guys, and the only musicians that played on the record were Winwood, Capaldi, and Chris Wood.
Mm-hmm.
No other musicians. And it was just, here's three guys that know each other well. They're very comfortable with each other, and their playing has come to mesh together well over the time they've been together, and they're just having fun, relatively lighthearted approach to what they were doing, and so it just has a comfortable, easy feeling to it, and it's a great opening track.
Absolutely, and I mean, the word that you used is exactly the word that I would use. It's accessible. In first hearing this album, or if I've gone for a long time without listening to this album, and this track comes on, it is got just such a familiar style to it. It almost has a feel like, oh, this must have been like the theme to some TV show that I used to watch all the time, or it was like a commercial logo or something that I was always listening to. It sounds familiar. Again, even if you haven't listened to it for a long time, it sounds like something that is so familiar to you. You hear it every day of your life. I can't describe it any other way than just really accessible. It's a song that feels like, you listen to it a lot, even though it's been, you haven't heard it in a while. So I don't know how or why it feels that way, aside from the fact that it's just they got into a comfortable jam and rhythm with the threesome and just made it float. You can picture the three of them playing this and kind of smiling at each other, saying, "This is just a good groove that we have here," because that's just the way that it feels when you're listening to it. A great tune and it certainly isn't pounding in any way. Again, there's a little bit of a, it starts, as you said, it's kind of a light, easy, kind of upbeat feel. It does have a change in the middle of it, but overall, it is really just such an easy to listen to song, that the perfect type of song you put on when you get home at the end of a long, hard day at work. It's a great just, kind of coast into a more relaxing state of mind.
Well, and you point out the accessibility. For example, about 10 years ago, or thereabouts, we had I was a member of the board of the local YMCA at the time, and there was a social function for some board members that was at our house, and so there were about 12, 14 people that neck of the woods that were here at our house, and they were primarily married couples,
Hmm.
and a few were older than Beth and I, and a few were younger. And it was we were having drinks and that kind of thing, and so it was a lighthearted social affair. And I was well, what kind of music should be played? And if I recall correctly, I played this album exactly because of the accessibility that you refer to. But it's definitely, there is a rock and
Hmm.
roll vibe that's in there. I mean, it's despite the R&B influences and the jazz that they were interested in. There's still, it feels like rock music.
Hmm.
That vibe, that attitude, that feel is not lost in the material. Um, just very solid, strong material that stands up and stands the test of time as much as any music that the band ever recorded.
Hmm.
And it moves into the second track is called Freedom Rider. And, this album, I think the music is more the focus than the lyrics, really, for me. Although the lyrics are worthwhile on the second and third tracks on the side.
Hmm.
Freedom Rider has a different, not quite as bubbly and upbeat as Glad, but not brooding or negative
Hmm.
either. Just more introspective, contemplative feel to it. Has piano, keyboard, a lot of keyboard in it. Piano and organ, but also not only a saxophone. There's flutes in there,
Hmm.
and the lyrics. Freedom Rider. There's a lot of people that speculate what the heck's he talking about, and talk about, for example, the in the southern United States, people that would ride the buses as
Hmm.
in the
Freedom
protests and
Riders.
whatnot,
Yeah.
freedom riders. But I don't look at it that way. And the first verse is like a hurricane around your heart when earth and sky are torn apart. He comes gathering up the bits while hoping that the puzzle fits, and he leaves you. He leaves you. So it's about a guy leaving a woman, and then freedom rider, he sings. And the way I look at this is the meaning of freedom rider. The movie Easy Rider, with Peter Fonda and Dennis
Yep.
Hopper. You hear that title and you think, Easy Rider. Okay, these guys are riding motorcycles,
Hmm.
and they're kind of laid back, hippie
They're
culture.
they're free.
They're easy.
Yeah.
Well, just easy riders.
Hmm.
That's when you hear the title of that movie, that's what you think. Well,
Sure.
what where Easy Rider comes from? That was something that comes from like old 1920s blues songs. And an easy rider, rider is someone that lives with a person. You're riding. Well, an
Hmm.
easy rider was a man who lived off a woman, and not necessarily like a pimp,
That's, yeah.
but like a guy that the woman would have the job, and she'd go off during the day and either be the waitress or do the
Hmm.
whatever, she'd work as a secretary, whatever her job was. and then she'd come home and he'd get her paycheck and she'd have to clean the apartment and cook the
Mm-hmm.
food, and he'd go off and do his thing with her
That's right.
money. I mean, that was
Mm-hmm.
an easy rider. And
Mm-hmm.
and the uh the way I interpret the song is that the people in each of the verses. There's three verses. You know, there's the guy that breaks up with or dumps the woman.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the middle verse, it's more of a I'm not sure. It seems to have some political allusion. You know, big man crying with defeat. See people gathering in the street with a silver star between his eyes that open up at hidden lies. Um, uh, but then Freedom Rider, and so the people that sort of abuse their freedom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've
Well, and
got the
that,
freedom to be with you or not, and so I've been with you. Thanks, I'm out of here.
yeah,
Um,
and that particular verse is probably the only one where you could really look at any notion of, and again, I agree with you. I don't see that this was a direct connection to the Freedom Riders. That which is what immediately comes to mind when you hear the title of the song. But this particular verse talking about, kind of this an authority figure with a star or a badge, pr- pr- potentially, preventing them from doing what they need to do. I mean, that potentially could be, or can be connected to, the civil rights movement and the police getting in the way. But there's so much, as you talked about the first verse and other parts that don't necessarily fit with that, with that narrative. So it really is kind of hard to get your arms around exactly, where this song is going, at least from the perspective of the lyrics.
and you know, like I said earlier, you know, I haven't spent a lot of time, you know, pondering what is the significance of the lyrics in Freedom Rider,
Sure.
because the musical feel of the song, and again, it has that, you know, the Jim Capaldi rhythm that just has it doesn't slap you in the face. You know, he's no Keith Moon or John
Hmm.
Bonham, or you know, Neil Peart, or these, you know, sort of in your face type drummers.
Hmm.
A lot more subtlety to that, but God, he can lay down a groove that just kind of keeps things on the up and up, in a unique way. And
Sure.
this song is similar to the way he's able to do the same thing in Glad, the opening track. Um, and the you know, I don't need to go through there's a third verse, and again, there's some ambiguity there. Um, but I've chosen to interpret the Freedom Rider as someone who takes advantage of you know, the freedom of whatever it might be, whether it's '60s culture or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's times too when, really getting to the heart of what a singer or a songwriter was trying to say isn't the most important thing. This
Yeah.
is an example of a song. It's like I don't really know. I have from time to time when I've been a little perplexed about someone was saying. I mean, there's all kinds of places out there that people put their thoughts about the meanings. There's websites and I actually looked this one up, and the only comment was from a person saying, "I can't believe nobody's commented about what this song means. I mean, it's such a great song. There should be all kinds of commentary here about what it means." And then he concluded by saying, "I don't know what it means, but it's a good song." And I guess that's kind of, and musically though is where this song. I mean, it starts out as you're coming into the song and the verses. It's got a feel to it. It definitely during the choruses of the song takes kind of a deeper, darker, or sadder type of tone, and then comes back up again, kind of for the verses. And then, as you talked about the flute, it almost sounds in the middle like you've got almost like two flutes dueling with each other. Is what it comes across at. So, the flow of the song and the musical nature of the song and the different instruments, especially the woodwinds that they're bringing into this, just make it a good song. And quite frankly, doesn't matter what they're talking about. Very good song.
When I mean, the bottom line about the lyrics, particularly of this song, is what you say. Um, uh, uh, in any case, the moving on to track number three, which is called "Empty Pages," a more kind of more of the uplifting,
Yes.
sort of brighter tone to the music, kind of like the first track. And not that Freedom Rider was this
Hmm.
brooding, type song, but just this Empty Pages has a very bright feel
Yes.
to it, very optimistic.
Hmm.
Things are looking up, a kind of feel to it, and lyrically, that song, is appears to be that he's, the Steve Winwood, I think he wrote and he definitely
Yes.
sang all of these lyrics,
Hmm.
and I believe that he wrote all of them himself. But he's just, I found someone who can comfort me, but there are always exceptions, and she's good at appearing sane. But I just want you to know. And so he's sort of saying, well, yeah, you never know,
Yeah.
but she's the one makes me feel so good when everything is against me, picks me up when I'm feeling bad, so I've got something to show.
Hmm.
So I mean, it kind of starts out with, you never know what's going to happen, but I it's good. Whatever's
Yeah.
happening right now, it's good.
Hmm.
But then the chorus is staring at empty pages, centered around the same old plot, staring at empty pages, flowing along the ages. And I, as to what that means, on the one hand, it seems like he's just found something that's good and different and new, and he's upbeat about it. But the centered around the same old plot, empty pages is like, is this going to be just the same old story?
Hmm.
Um, uh, uh, and then goes into the often lost and forgotten, the vagueness and the mud. I've been thinking I'm working too hard, but I've got something to show. Often lost and forgotten, the vagueness and the mud. So it's like everything is the same squishy nonsense that never amounts to anything. I've been working hard at it, but I've got something to show. And so, um, uh, I think the bottom line is that, this is someone who's been used to the same old thing, and the empty pages are starting to get filled in, or at least that's what he's looking at.
Certainly. Well, and first thing, you talked earlier about the album Arc of a Diver. I mean, this song you could slide this in to the album Arc of a Diver, and it would sound right like, I mean, it sounds like Steve Winwood's solo work. As you talked about before, this was really going to be a solo album. This was Steve Winwood, and he, brought these players back, so returned to a work from Traffic. But this song sounds like the songs on Arc of a Diver. It's got the same feel, obviously Steve Winwood's vocals, but he was in the frame of mind, the same frame of mind that he was when he was writing the songs on Arc of a Diver. So I think it's a just pulled from those pages almost, obviously, but a number of years earlier. And as far as I can't, to me, the if you're talking about a writer or a songwriter, what they probably spend the most time staring at is an empty page. It's like I've got to. What I need to do is I need to get this song down on paper, or much like a writer does, or whatever. So you can understand how that would be something that they would use as a tool in a lot of different types of narratives that they had. Before thinking at all about the lyrics, thinking about someone who was a very you know strong and prolific songwriter, I thought to myself, yeah, he probably spent a lot of time looking at empty pages, which is again a tool that he would use in a lot of different situations, whether it be describing his life or his accomplishments, or if he was feeling a little bit unaccomplished at a particular time, that would be a good way of describing it.
No, well, I think the comparison with Arc of a Diver is a good one.
Hmm.
And well, there's no and the concept of empty pages. One of the things that I've been doing in retirement, for the last 8 months or so, is writing. And, and some of that is legal writing. Some of that is for some newspaper columns that are commentary on current events and whatnot. But I've also working on some fiction. And, if a person could just take what's in their head and put it down on paper coherently, quickly, everyone would be a writer.
Yeah.
And because and I consider myself, after the work I did for 30 years and whatnot, I consider myself to be relatively qualified to try my hand at these things. And getting what's in your head onto the page or onto the word processor, in my case, that's what distinguishes between a real writer and a wannabe, and a genuine artist or musician or songwriter, and someone who's kind of a wannabe. And I think that Steve Winwood did a wonderful job in this song of basically kind of summing up someone who's cautiously optimistic and is happy to realize they're in love with someone, and it's a good thing, not a burden. Now, before I don't want the music of Empty Pages to get lost in the shuffle. I started out talking about the lyrics, but like I say, it starts out with organ basically, and there are no woodwinds. Chris Wood does not play any woodwind instruments on this track. On the album cover, it indicates he plays organ, and it's definitely a keyboard dominated song musically. Has the same type of Jim Capaldi groove that I've talked about already, and there is the instrumental break where there is a relatively lengthy keyboard solo by Steve Winwood, and I am here to declare that the keyboard solo in Empty Pages is the best keyboard solo in classic rock. Don't tell me about Rick Wakeman or Keith Emerson or whoever. Winwood's organ solo or his keyboard solo, I don't know whether it was a Hammond like B3 organ or electric piano, but the keyboard solo in Empty Pages is the keyboard solo of the classic rock era. Now, what do you think of that?
It sounds like you're going pretty strong on record for that, and I'm certainly not going to. I'm not going to dispute it. I can also see how you've got people that may have been like a Rick Wakeman or that type of thing known for that, but it was a different type of playing the organ. Steve Winwood made the organ fall into a piece of rock music almost like it was a guitar, the way that it flowed in, as opposed to you get someone like a Rick Wakeman, where you almost had to pause when they were really going to highlight his skills. You almost had to pause from what the song was doing, and then okay, Rick's going to do a solo here and get into all of his type of stuff. You did not have the same type of notion that it was part of the rhythm, but not as like you would expect the strength of, say, a guitar in a piece of music. And Steve Winwood, especially in Traffic here, absolutely brought that, which is kind of the only way, if you can picture, like we were talking about the band Blind Faith, you don't have a keyboard player coming in to play with someone like Eric Clapton because they want to put together this super group. If they don't have that type of what they're bringing to the table, what they're bringing to the band. So I would agree that it was just a different type of keyboard that Steve Winwood was bringing in the first place. So that makes it, puts him in a position to have a much stronger type of solo. So I'm not going to put any money on the table against your assertion there.
Steve Winwood, and he was, at the time this album was recorded, he was like 22 years old, maybe 23, but he was young.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he's kind of a skinny young English kid.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he grew up in London or somewhere else in England, but I mean, he was a white English kid, and both his singing and his keyboard playing, he brought a soulfulness to both of those things, to his
Mm-hmm.
singing and his keyboard playing, that for a white musician, and I'm not saying he's the most soulful white musician
Yeah.
out there, but he certainly was up there in his ability, whether you want to call it blue-eyed soul or whatever. He just had that feel, and like R&B material and its influence on the sound that Traffic eventually developed. His soulfulness was great. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it just fit in perfectly with that, and and kind of like on Arc of a Diver later on, in his solo career, it just had a feel to it, that like a pouring some syrup over a thing of pancakes. It just he just had a very soulful feel to both his singing and his playing, and and like I say, Chris Wood wasn't a real standout in here, but the drumming on Capaldi's part, this may be the best of the three songs in terms of his drumming. And
Mm-hmm.
when Winwood is playing this keyboard solo, at about 2/3 of the way through, there's just a cymbal hit
Mm-hmm.
that is just perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and Beth, I'll be, if we're on a road trip and because Beth likes this album, not, unlike a lot of the music that I want to listen to, that I've stopped playing in the car just to give Beth a break.
Yeah.
But this is one, and we'll be going down the road, and I'll like take my hand and it just, because it's just so natural, and so it's like he knew the exact right place
Mm-hmm.
to hit that cymbal. It's almost the only real cymbal hit in the whole break.
That's it. But he did it in the right place.
He did it in just the right place.
Yeah.
And I can't really think of another example of that kind of thing off the top of my head, but it's just this little detail that if someone takes the time to listen to it,
Mm-hmm.
and okay, you get to the third song, it's empty pages, Steve Winwood's playing the keyboard, you're going to hear this cymbal.
Yeah.
It's going to come at just the right time. And not all bands, had that innate sort of feel where they could just be in the right place at the right time. And Traffic was one of those bands, in my humble opinion.
And I think this particular side is one of the reasons that we talk about sides the way that we do, because the way that it starts as we go back to the beginning with this instrumental piece that is just, it very easily brings you in. I mean, it can bring anybody into the album itself. You have this song in the middle that the Freedom Riders that we talked about, that is, again, what we don't necessarily need to sink into what they're saying, but musically it has started to build on this original instrumental. And then it closes with an incredibly strong, great song, which, really showcases Steve Winwood as the very talented artist that he was, and builds with, just an amazing keyboard solo as well. Again, just the album itself is a great experience to go from start to finish, which is what we love on the Sideshow.
Yeah. And one final bit about Steve Winwood that I neglected to point out, in his original, when he originally was a member of the Spencer Davis Group before Traffic, when he was like 17 or something. Another song incredibly popular from the Big Chill soundtrack, "Gimme Some Lovin'."
Mm-hmm.
That's Spencer Davis Group, and so that's Steve Winwood singing lead, and that really kind of that organ sound in "Gimme Some Lovin'," where they're playing the touch football game during halftime of the Michigan game in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's him playing keyboards and singing.
Mm-hmm.
Like 17 years old, 17-year-old white kid from England.
Yeah.
He's both
Yep.
singing that song, and so just a great musician, a great band with other good musicians, and when we first came up with this idea for doing the sideshow, this is one of the sides that I had in mind.
Well, glad we had a chance to listen to it. So, Traffic, John Barleycorn Must Die, side one. Another great side.
All right, all right. We will talk to you for the next episode.